So, is Half-Life a horror game? It's certainly hard to tell. Valve has repeatedly said that they consider Half-Life as an obscure game, much more than the second game in fact, but is that considered horror? This is a question that has the community split. On one side, there are people that find the game frightening, yeah. On the other, some think it's a walk in the park. So if we'd like to more accurately categorize Half-Life in a genre, I would say that the game is a survival horror. This genre is a combination between an action game and a horror game where the player has to survive the attack of enemies while limited in ammunition, health, and overall resources. The best examples of this are the first 3 Resident Evil and the first Silent Hills, where we needed to survive in a hostile world where zombies or demonic creatures would try to kill us. We would feel vulnerable and exposed throughout the game, despite the fact that we had weapons and ammunition to defend ourselves. That was because the ammo was limited, health items were too, and furthermore, even saving the game was a limited resource. Half-Life came out in 1998. At that time, the genre was super popular. Resident Evil had come out only 2 years ago, and the acclaimed Resident Evil 2 came out that same year. With all this in mind, it wouldn't be crazy to assume that Valve took inspiration from these games to shape theirs, right? But they feel different, they do. If you ask somebody that played both games, he'd tell you that they might be similar, but they really aren't the same thing. So why? Well, Valve's game has some key differences to Capcom's game. The first and most apparent one is the camera. In Resident Evil 2, the camera is fixed in a predetermined spot all around the map. You could see this as if the police station and all the places we visit had security cameras, and instead of playing the game in first or third person view, we play as someone watching those security cameras. Needless to say, you cannot move a security camera, they're fixed in place, and likewise, the camera in-game is fixed too. This style of showing the world was chosen on purpose to remove control from the player. With this style, the player is very limited when it comes to seeing enemies or threats, giving us the sensation that we lack control, that there are things lurking in the dark. This is key for survival horror, as you want to make the player feel vulnerable. Because we cannot move the camera freely, anything outside the shot is a mystery. We don't know how much of a threat it is. Going back to Half-Life, the game gives us a first-person perspective, with complete freedom to move the camera. This removes some of the possible fear that the game could cause, as the player doesn't feel vulnerable anymore. You can move the camera whatever you want, thus you can easily defend yourself if there is something lurking behind you. It might seem dumb, but this extra control gives the players more confidence and thus removes part of the fear. The second aspect that I think separates Half-Life from a traditional survival horror is the weaponry. As I discussed earlier, having limited ways to defend yourself is key to a satisfactory horror experience. A good survival horror game is very careful in giving you weapons. Usually in these games, aiming is difficult and inconvenient, thanks to the tank type controls. It's difficult to move the character and run away. Furthermore, the weapons aren't very effective and they usually lack ammunition, so you gotta be careful when spending it. You gotta make sure not to waste it. So yes, you indeed have guns, but they're so ineffective that the threat is far from over. In Valve's game, all this simply doesn't exist. Moving is fairly easy, and Gordon runs really fast, usually much faster than any enemy. You can move your camera freely, so aiming is easy, and the arsenal that you possess is ridiculous. You have conventional firearms like pistols and submachine guns, but also alien weapons, rocket launchers, trip mines, grenades, and even weird experimental weapons that don't even exist. You're far from vulnerable. The complete opposite, in fact. You're a killing machine. bouncing around, throwing explosives and shooting hundreds of rounds per minute. The only possible similarity would be the ambience. In Half-Life, you go through an abandoned and partially destroyed Black Mesa. Many of the places you visit are dark and filled with dead scientist corpses, remnants of what once was a place filled with busy people with their busy tasks. You're also forced to go through small and claustrophobic places like the infamous vents, although if this is gonna be enough to scare a player, that will entirely depend on the player himself. Certainly the old graphics don't help in making the decaying Black Mesa look frightening. So, can we say for sure that Half-Life is not scary? Well, not so fast. There is one chapter of the game that I have been deliberately avoiding, one portion that is different from the others, and that was a nightmare when I was a kid. It was so dreaded, in fact, that I would try to go through it as quickly as possible, and I would get anxious simply knowing that it was coming. Even today, after all these years, it's still hard for me to play through it. I'm talking about Apprehension. Apprehension is the 9th chapter of the game, and it comes right after On a Rail. As we're riding the last train, it goes off course and crashes, leaving us in an abandoned and flooded old laboratory of Black Mesa. We move through it, solving a few puzzles along the way, until we find it, the Ichthyosaur. This is an aquatic creature. Its presentation is iconic and terrifying. The scientist nearby tells us that it had been hauled from the Challenger Deep about a week ago.
Did you see it? They said it was hauled from the Challenger Deep, but I'm positive that beast never swam in terrestrial waters until a week ago. There's a tranquilizer gun in the shark cage, but I'm not sure it would work on this species. You're welcome to try.
Then, we find a shark's cage with a crossbow inside, and it's time to fight it.
Vital signs are dropping. Ammunition depleted.
So, what made these alien sharks so scary? Remember how I said that in survival horrors the camera is fixed to remove control from the player and thus make it more scary? I also said that doesn't happen in Half-Life. Well, I was telling the truth, except for when you're underwater. When you are, the gameplay changes dramatically. Visibility is highly reduced, moving the player goes from being easy and comfortable to confusing and awkward. And besides, running away isn't an option either. The Ichthyosaur swims much faster than us. All the things that made a survival horror scary suddenly come to life. I also said how limiting the chances for the player to defend himself were important. Well, underwater, almost all of the guns are useless, except for the weak pistol and the slow crossbow. And on top of all that, a giant scary creature is swimming towards us with its weird movement, ready to tear us apart. It's not a coincidence that this was so scary for so many players. As you see, all of the aspects that make games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill so frightening, the reduced camera control, the limited weaponry, and the scary monsters, all come together in this chapter. It is simply one of the scariest moments in video game history. With all that said, it's important to clarify that you encounter the Ichthyosaur more times along the way, but none of them are as charming as the first one. Besides, in the other occasions that you encounter it, avoiding it is much easier and you're more experienced, so it doesn't really have the same impact. With all that said, I can comfortably say, is Half-Life 1 a scary game? For the most part, not really. Is the chapter apprehension scary? Absolutely. And with that, I conclude this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If that's the case, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Bye!